Afternoon, Phil. How are you?
Good afternoon. I'm very well, thank you.
Jolly good. Phil, welcome to the Business Spotlight. Thanks very much for taking the time to speak with me today. Could we start? Could you tell me a little about yourself, your background, and your business, please?
Sure. So I'm my background is as a civil engineer. Um, Started from graduation, went to a college in London called UCL. Worked for a large British construction company called Costain for many, many years. Then worked in Ireland building motorways during the Celtic Tiger, and then I ran a quite a large international consulting business, consulting engineering business, design engineering business. And then eventually I ended up developing projects in developing countries, including Africa and the Caribbean. And that's what I do today, which is to finance, design, and build major projects in countries that need infrastructure desperately to improve their economy and the life for people.
And how long have you been a civil engineer for?
I've been in this business 35 years.
And was that what you always wanted to do?
No, not really. I mean, I when I was a kid, I was very practical, so I was always doing outdoor work, building things, which I loved to do. And it was my father who said to me one day, "Oh, you like building things? Why don't you become a civil engineer?" And that's I had no idea what I wanted to do, so I did it, and that's where I began.
And what you mentioned about Ireland in the Celtic Tiger days and motorway. Any ones in particular that people would know?
Yeah, I was involved in two stretches of the M1 Dublin to Belfast Road, the Drogheda stretch and the Dundalk stretch. The Dundalk stretch was in joint venture between a Southern Irish and Northern Irish contractor, which was, for those who remember back in those days, it was when there was still a little bit of tension between North and South politically.
Mm.
And also there's a lot of funding coming from the European Union to fund projects, which in the end obviously enabled Ireland to be a successful economy. So yeah, that was where I began there.
Well, I owe you a debt of thanks, as do a lot of people. And it used to take 3 hours to drive to Dublin. It was horrendous back in the day. So thanks for playing your part in
Yeah, well,
making
I benefited as well. So,
And tell me a little more about your target market. You talk about the developing world and people in dire need of infrastructure. Tell me a little more about that.
yeah, so for example, I'll give you a straightforward example. We're building a motorway, a 10-lane motorway in Ghana at the moment, which links it's called the ECOWAS Road, which links the West Africa coastal route to Nigeria, from Ghana and going all the way to Cote d'Ivoire. What we do is we go into a particular country where there's an appetite to borrow money and they have the available capacity to borrow money. We then facilitate the lending of very, very competitive, low interest finance, which is underwritten by the British government. So typically the finance wouldn't really exceed 4% interest on the asset. And also the terms of the deal are that we build the asset before any repayments need to be made. So the government benefits from the income from an asset before they have to make the repayments. So it's a very big deal. So we typically go and see, it could be a senior minister or a president, and we'll explain the finance offer we have. And if they're interested in the type of financing we offer, they will highlight projects that are within our zone of capability, and we will pick one, which can be as simple. For example, if the Ghana Road was simply a one line on a scrap of paper, and that was back in 2017. I met the Minister of Roads and Highways, who drew a line on a scrap of paper and said, "I need a motorway from here to here." And from that scrap of paper, we developed the engineering designs, environmental plans, everything that, for example, in the UK, could take 20 years to get from concept to construction. We will develop that within a year. And in that particular case, the line on the piece of paper was drawn in 2017 and we commenced construction in 2020.
Wow.
So the advantage is massive to the local governments who need infrastructure desperately now, whether it be water, hospitals, roads, airports. They desperately need these things. It's a matter of life and death in many cases. And so our solution, plus also we develop a very high quality product because of our original British background in civil engineering. So the combined solution really meets the needs of governments. The British government love it because we are what's called a British exporter, and at least 30% of the revenue must come back to Britain from anything we do. We're a British taxpayer, and therefore all of the tax that we make in terms of corporation tax, etc., goes back to the British government.
And how do you get in touch with potential countries or organizations that could avail of your services? Where do leads come from?
It's pretty straightforward. So we have a deselection criteria, which is a desktop exercise. So we'll look at, firstly, have they got available borrowing capacity? Clearly, if they haven't, there's little point us going there. We'll then look at what at the World Bank do what's called ease of doing business. So we'll look at their ease of doing business scores, and if it's reasonably acceptable, it's not too difficult to work there, we'll then move it to the next gateway. The next gateway will look at their corruption indices. If the place is too corrupt, we can't do business there because we're subject to international rules that forbids that. So if once we've come through that gateway, then we identify their project needs. So we'll look at their priority projects, and then we'll go to the country with the help of the British government, Foreign Commonwealth Development Office, and we'll go in partnership and we'll develop opportunities using the British High Commission to link us up with local ministers, etc., to work forward and develop a project.
And you mentioned the project that's underway in Ghana. Anything else in the pipeline?
We're just closing a deal in Guyana. Guyana is the fastest growing economy in the world, but it's currently a very poor country, but it discovered oil very recently, about 5 years ago. We're just closing a deal to build them a new arrivals terminal at the airport. In Uganda, we're mid the development stage on a massive agricultural industrial park. It's a huge park to develop products from farm to our park and process them so they could be on Sainsbury's shelves within about 3 days. Currently, 50% of all the food stuff gets lost from farm to market because of rotting. So our industrial parks will, because they pre-package stuff quickly, avoids that loss of food, which then can go to the international markets. So that's another example of the types of projects.
Very good. And what about in terms of, if you think of if you put your business owner hat on, what would you say has been your biggest lesson as a business owner over the years?
Look, the industry has changed, not just construction. Generally, industry has changed significantly in my career. When I started in the industry, it was a hierarchical culture. In many ways, hierarchy is easy because there's bosses and everyone talks to the boss, etc. However, the trend over the last 15 years has been more to have a collaborative style of management. The shift from hierarchy to collaboration was a difficult challenge when you're brought up as a youngster in a hierarchical culture and you shift to collaboration. But more importantly, young people that we recruit today are used to a fundamentally different style of management to the style that existed when I was a young graduate.
Yeah.
And therefore finding flexible ways to encourage people to want to work with a company and be motivated to work is very difficult. Getting good people who really do want to work and do well is very hard to find. So the number one challenge I always have is finding the right people.
What have you learned about yourself along the way over the years?
I think for me, so halfway through my career, I embarked on a program called the Insights Program, which is part of was led by a lady called Nicola Temporal of Temporal Consulting. That gives you the ability to become self-aware, aware of your impact on others, and also aware of other people as motivators and drivers. Or put in a very simple way that Nicola describes it, is um, judge other people by their intention, judge yourself by your impact. And for me, that was a big turning point to become self-aware of how I impacted on other people. Prior to that, in my hierarchical construction days, I had little understanding of my impact and didn't care, to be frank. It was only as time went by, I realized it was important.
And who's influenced you the most along the way?
So that would have been Nicola Temple.
All
She
right.
was my coach for many years, and that development stage in self-understanding was probably the biggest influence for me.
And what is it that gets you out of bed and drives your passion for business?
So when I first started in the construction industry as a young engineer, all I saw was aggression. Um, People just shouting and swearing at each other, and I that was absolutely what I disagree with. I believe in professionalism, respect. So my desire was always, as a young engineer, I wanted to be a project manager to show people what a respectful project could look like as opposed to an aggressive climate.
Mm.
Once I became a project manager, I looked up at the bosses, the managing directors, and I thought, well, I don't like the way they behave either. I'll need to get that job in order to show what a respectful culture can look like and how people can be treated from top to bottom the way they ought to be treated.
Mhm.
And what gets me up is this desperate desire before I retire to build my business into a proper international company of a large scale. At the moment, it's reasonably small, but of a completely different culture to the normal culture one would find in the construction industry.
Very good. That's yeah, culture. It's becoming more and more talked about now, and it's interesting. I had a chat with somebody last week, and they said, well, you know, why should they were relatively starting out in their business, and they said, well, why, I don't really have a culture. What I said, you have got a culture. You know, the culture is what you make it. You know, you
Yeah,
make it from the
exactly.
start and build it from there. It's harder to reverse into a culture that already exists. So no, that's great. That's great to hear. What about if you on the unlikely event? Well, you might be potentially stranded in a desert island, more likely than some of the other people I speak to with where you go. But if you were and you could read a book or listen to a podcast, what would you choose?
My favorite book is Stephen Covey's Seven Habits. I've read it a few times, and if I was stuck and that was the only book I could have, that would be the book I'd read because it balances your personal well-being with your desire to be successful in life and career, family, etc., etc. It's a good balancing book. So that would be it.
Yeah, great recommendation. And if anyone's listening to this, yeah, I would 100% second that. Yeah, great book to read. And what's the biggest challenge that you're currently facing in business?
So we're suddenly about to boom in terms of the amount of work that we've got coming through. The business relies heavily on me personally. I have a lot of relationships with the customers, and it's not a sustainable business unless I can secure significantly more high quality people prepared to take responsibility and ownership. So finding people is number one challenge for me.
And go a little bit in a different direction. What if you could invite any three people, alive or dead, to a dinner party? Who would you invite?
Well, it would be my father, who is always my coach when he was alive. I used to often be when I get in my mid-career, I was often a bit late for work because I used to sit fascinated listening to my father's advice and stories of his life. So I definitely would like to have my father at that table. A chap called Graham Franklin, who was my mentor for many years, who an ex very senior executive in Hertz, who I found inspirational in the way he looked at things, and I could spend hours just listening to him. And probably the last one would be Cary Grant, because when I was a kid, he was such a warm, friendly man with a humorous style. He would be what I'd aspire to be like if I could be.
Very good. And if you could go back in time and dish out some advice to the young 18-year-old Phil, what would that be?
I think I think I would try to advise not to assume you're always right. but to try and understand what other people's views are, and then you'll have a broader a broader career by trying to understand other people's opinions rather than the assumption you're right. I think that I would have liked to have spent less time in the corporate world. And maybe I would have liked to have been younger when I started off a venture like I'm doing now, when I had more energy than I do today to see it through. I'd love to do 20 more years, but reality is younger people need to come in and take over.
Well, let's not go 20 years in front. Let's look five. So what does your business look like in 5 years' time?
In 5 years, looking at the trajectory of everything we've created, a huge amount of foundation work has gone on over the last 3 years. I suspect we will be a pretty major player in the specialist market we're in, which is construction of major infrastructure projects worldwide, particularly in developing countries. So I could see as we never want to be a floated company with no aspiration of being anything but private. We never want to be too big that we can't know what's going on in our company. So if we were running with, say, 10 major projects worldwide, these are very big projects. They're hundreds of millions of dollars. We're running with 10 projects and they're all being built to a quality standard with a good culture and good client relationships. That would be, in 5 years' time, a great result for me.
And if somebody likes what they've heard, Phil, and would like to reach out and get in touch with you or the business, what would be the best way for them to go about that?
They can go through it if they want to get in contact with us and go through our website, the www.mowlemgroup.com.
Superb. Well, Phil Atkinson from Mowlem Group, thanks very much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's a fascinating business and some great insights there into what shaped you and the business. And I wish you every success for this year and beyond. I'm sure you'll achieve those goals. Phil, thanks very much indeed.
Thank you for your time.